The destruction of the Sith Order 1,000 years before the Battle of Yavin heralded the beginning of the Galactic Republic's Golden Age, and the demilitarization of both the Republic and its Jedi protectors. However, while the Jedi believed the Sith to be destroyed by them, in truth they had been destroyed by one of their own. Darth Bane had manipulated the leader of the Brotherhood of Darkness into deploying the Thought Bomb, a terrifyingly destructive weapon that killed all Force users within its radius. Leaving his fellow Sith to die in the caverns of Ruusan, Bane made a new decree for the Sith to follow. Two there should be, no more, no less. One to embody the power, the other to crave it. Under this new imperative the Sith went underground, becoming physicians, starship designers, business managers, bankers, and politicians. The line of Sith Lords lasted for 1,000 years, eventually culminating in Darth Sidious, who destroyed the Jedi and subjugated the galaxy. However, none of Sidious's achievements would have been possible without the actions of his master Darth Plagueis the Wise. The Mune Hugo Damask was born on the colony world of Megito, the son of Car Damask and his codical partner. However, unbeknownst to either father or son, this union had been manipulated by Darth Tenebrous, who had, through the use of myth science, predicted that a child produced by the two would have a very high force potential. When the day came, Lord Tenebrous claimed his apprentice, and Plagueis would spend the next few decades learning the ways of the Sith. All the while, they would travel the galaxy spreading corruption and dissent whenever they could. In 67 BBY, Plagueis murdered his master, taking on the mantle of Dark Lord of the Sith for himself. Plagueis then went on to search for an apprentice, eventually settling on Palpatine, a young heir to a royal house on Naboo. Goading him into murdering his family, Plagueis took him on as his apprentice and trained him in the way of the dark side and the political manipulation, dubbing him Darth Sidious. Together, the two Sith would spend decades manipulating galactic events in order to position Palpatine to assume power as the Supreme Chancellor. Though they suffered their share of setbacks, the most notable of which was an assassination attempt by the Grand Protectorate that left Plagueis grievously injured and unable to breathe without the use of a respirator. However, together the Sith prevailed, though unfortunately for Plagueis, as Palpatine rejected his master's notion of a partnership, killing him in his sleep. Years before, Palpatine used the term Darth Plagueis the Wise to flatter his master. He continued to use it after his death, to mock him. While the manipulations of Plagueis and Sidious bore fruit, a Jedi Master was rising up the ranks of the Order. A female Togrutan, Shaak Ti was appointed to the Jedi Council following the death of Master Yaddle on Muon in 26 BBY. One of the few survivors of the Battle of Geonosis, Shaak Ti was one of 10 Jedi High Generals when the Order was shoehorned into military service at the start of the Clone Wars, leading the Republic to victory on notable battlefronts such as Brental IV and Dagu, among others, along with surviving multiple engagements with the infamous CIS commander, General Grievous. Rising to prominence as a noted Republic war hero, T was appointed as head of the defense of the Jedi Temple in 19 BBY, as Mace Windu led a Jedi strike team to kill Chancellor Palpatine, who had by then revealed his Sith identity to Anakin Skywalker. Though unable to stop the Temple's destruction when Order 66 was enacted, she did manage to hold off against the newly appointed Sith apprentice, Darth Vader, while multiple Jedi escaped the Temple. She then managed to escape his clutches, going into hiding on Felucia, where she found time to begin training a new Padawan named Maris Brood. Surviving much of the dark times, T was eventually located by Darth Vader, who sent his assassin and secret apprentice Galen Merrick to kill her. After a lengthy duel near the ancient abyss, a mega sarlacc that was used for sacrificial offerings by the natives, T was slain by Merrick. She was survived by her apprentice, Maris Brood, who fell to the dark side after T's death, and wreaked havoc across Felucia until being targeted by Merrick as well. Hello YouTube, this is the Phoenix Exalt bringing you the next installment of my Versus series. For this analysis, I will be using Shaak Ti during the time frame of The Force Unleashed and Darth Plagueis from the timeline of Act 3 of his book. I will be pulling from Legends continuity along with any canon materials that do not directly interfere with previously made Legends materials. Due to the fact that the Disney Story Group is going in a direction that is neither original nor creative, I will not be using canon as the main point of Star Wars media for my videos, though I am quite willing to use characters and events that do not overwrite previous ones, such as Ahsoka Tano, as I quite like these characters, and they only add to the universe and do not detract in almost any way. As always, I own none of the characters, art, or other media depicted in this video, and all rights to them go to the respective companies. With that out of the way, I present to you Darth Plagueis versus Shaak Ti. If these two combatants met on the battlefield, who would be the victor? I shall begin with their physical capabilities. Darth Plagueis was a male Muun of well over a century in age. Muns were a long-lived humanoid species that were distinguished by their 3 hearts, mathematical intelligence, long if not lanky bodies, and their greedy nature. Though Muun were generally a reserved species who were not known for their physical prowess, Plagueis was an exception, being crafted by Darth Tenebrous' Bith science and intense Sith training. His long limbs allowed him exceptional reach in combat, while his lanky body afforded him great flexibility, an edge he took full advantage of, often performing evasive contortions in the midst of combat. Additionally, his 3 hearts, 2 of which were voluntary controlled, allowed him to better withstand blood loss and injury, a capacity that was reinforced by his knowledge of Sith techniques and rituals. Afflicted by his deep immersion in the dark side of the Force, Plagueis displayed the yellow eyes and deathly pale complexion common to all Sith Lords. Despite this, he was in robust health, and though through his mastery of midichlorian manipulation, his body had even begun a process of reverse aging and countering his previous degenerations. However, during an attempt on his life, portions of his lower face and upper neck were removed, forcing him to wear a transpirator mask to breathe. While the mask provided an immunity to airborne toxins, it was also extremely vulnerable to electronic discharge. If the mask is damaged or disabled, he suffocates, which after all was the cause of his death. Shaak Ti was a Togrutan female, which by itself brought numerous advantages over her opponents. While her exact age was never specified in any source, she was noted as being slightly older than Obi-Wan Kenobi, which would put her in the mid to late 50s range by the time of her death in 3 BBY. Given the fact that a Togrutan's average lifespan is around 94 years, and that the light side of the Force is known for its sustaining power, I think that it's safe to assume that T was still in her physical prime when she fought Galen Merrick, a conclusion backed by how evenly the two were despite Merrick's relative youth. Native to the jungle world of Shilai, Togrutans were known for having superior strength, agility, and durability as compared to humans. While not a heavily armored muscle tank compared to the likes of Darth Malgus or Vader, along with lacking any form of cybernetic enhancements, Shaak Ti was easily compared to Obi-Wan Kenobi or Anakin Skywalker. She has survived being buried under a mountain of rubble, has worked through being shot in the abdomen at point-blank range, has powered through repeated strikes from electrostaffs, and has even continued fighting after being stabbed in the gut by a lightsaber blade. Togrutans were further distinguished by having 2 hollow montrals protruding from their heads. These montrals were a tremendous asset when it came to personal combat, as they provided a form of passive echolocation. This gives T a heightened awareness during combat that projects a 360-degree view of her surroundings, allowing her to easily multitask between multiple opponents. In short, you're not finishing off Shaak Ti with a few hits. It's a death blow or nothing. This conclusion took some thought. While Darth Plagueis does have 3 hearts, and he does have a reach advantage, I simply do not see him overcoming Shaak Ti in a physical battle. Shaak Ti has numerous advantages over Plagueis that he simply cannot compete with. T's passive echolocation means that there is no chance of a surprise attack from out of her line of sight. Her more sturdy nature allows her to fight through attacks lethal to Plagueis. Shaak Ti is also being continually sustained by the light side, while Plagueis is suffering from dark side degradation. Additionally, one needs simply look at how their species evolved to get a sense of their capabilities, with Munes having been bankers for millennia, while Tegrutans having evolved and stayed predators who hunt wild beasts with their bare hands. Most importantly, and above all else, Darth Plagueis has a potentially crippling weakness in his transpirator mask. Should Shaak Ti disable his mask in any way, Plagueis would have at most 3 minutes to live before he's suffocated. Lastly, there is one final option for T. She is much, much faster than Plagueis. So much so that if for whatever reason she found herself losing in a fight, she could leave and there would be nothing Plagueis could do about it. He would be unable to catch her. Jedi Master Shaak Ti gets the edge for physical abilities. Now we move on to martial arts and lightsaber dueling. In the words of Darth Sidious, the Sith had outgrown the need for lightsabers, but continue to do so, if only to humiliate the Jedi. This could more than easily be applied to Darth Plagueis, though for a different reason than his apprentice. While Sidious believed that his mastery of the Force was so complete that he no longer needed a lightsaber, Plagueis simply did not enjoy physical combat. This does not mean, however, that Plagueis was not an expert fighter. Plagueis had familiarized himself with every mass-produced weapon in existence, knowing the firing rate, reload time, make, model, and how to position himself for the best possible deflection. Plagueis, by necessity, molded himself into a general-purpose operative who could deal with any scenario presented to him. Plagueis himself was a master of lightsaber combat, ironic considering his disdain for the art. While the Sith Lord's chosen form has not been confirmed in any source, it is not hard to imagine that his disdain for combat led him to practice Diplomat Snyman. Form 6 Snyman was a hybridization of Forms 1 through 5, and the Diplomat's form was a way for the combatant to cover their bases without having to put too much thought into the overall style or form. Diplomat Snyman is the equivalent in my eyes to studying only until achieving a passing grade and then stopping. The way that Darth Plagueis normally conducts himself in a lightsaber duel is exemplified through his confrontation with Venomius. Plagueis would begin the duel by going through a normal set of lightsaber and force-based attacks, and should he be pressed further, he would take himself out of his body and fight defensively based purely on rote response. He would keep this defensive posture until noticing a defensive lapse in his opponent, and then would rush back into his body and strike his opponent down. However, as demonstrated in the aforementioned duel with Venomius, his defenses were not insurmountable, and could be penetrated by a skilled opponent. Lastly, there is one final weakness within his combat technique. Plagueis was always concerned with how the scene of the fight would look like to an observer after the battle, and how he fought would depend on this. While he could cut you to ribbons with his lightsaber, it would be much easier to explain if he simply turned your head around on your shoulders, which exposes the weakness of his technique. His unwillingness to use his full power and skill set at a moment's notice can leave him dangerously exposed during combat, and was nearly his undoing against Venomius. All in all, Plagueis is a master combatant, but lacks enthusiasm, and this lack of respect and enjoyment for physical combat leaves him at the mercy of the limitations of his skill set. Described by Obi-Wan Kenobi as one of the most cunning Jedi he ever met, Shaak Ti was one of the Order's premier swordswomen. During the Clone Wars, Shaak Ti would become one of the few Jedi to survive multiple confrontations with General Grievous. While not the victor on Hypori or Coruscant, it should be noted that during neither time was Shaak Ti operating under peak efficiency. During both cases, she was both previously injured and had already participated in a marathon battle before being engaged by Grievous. Possibly one of Shaak Ti's greatest showings was when she fought against an entire army of IG-100 Magna Guards, and putting a severe dent in their forces before being called away. A noted accomplishment, as even one Magna Guard was said to be more than a match for a Jedi Knight. T's final opponent would be Darth Vader's secret apprentice Galen Marek, codenamed Starkiller at the time. While T never properly defeated Marek, It was clear that she dominated the entire fight and practically gave the victory to Merrick out of pity. During the entire duel, she only faltered when Merrick managed to stab T in the gut with his lightsaber. However, the Force Unleashed novelization makes it clear that this feat came from luck on Merrick's part, and not from greater skill. Shaak Ti would even duel Darth Vader during Operation Nightfall, stalling his advance while giving other Jedi time to escape. Shaak Ti would stalemate Vader before fleeing due to the massive amount of clone troopers inside the temple, and the Force telling her that her destiny lied elsewhere. Holding off Vader, even pre-suit Vader, for any length of time is not a feat to be taken lightly. Shaak Ti would learn from others in her order and diversify her skill set, branching out rather than relying on a particular style to suit her combat needs. She would rely on a personal hybridization of Form 2 Makashi and Form 4 Ataru, her aptitude in the former having been directly compared to that of Count Dooku, who was the reigning master of Makashi at the time. Makashi was an old fencing style based around lightsaber dueling, and was at one point the most common form in the Order, but was rendered obsolete due to the widespread emergence of blaster technology. Ataru was an extremely aggressive form of lightsaber combat that is based around elaborate flourishes, extreme force-assisted acrobatics, and physical combat techniques. Extremely fluid and agile, Shaak Ti's saber offense was a mixture of the linear efficiency of Makashi and the maneuvers and acrobatics of Ataru. As with most Form 4 specialists, Shaak Ti possessed a lethal efficiency with unarmed combat, having been shown in multiple depictions as breaking battle droids' armor plating with a physical strike. Once, she even decapitated a Magna Guard with her unarmored knee. Additionally, in the fight against the Magna Guard army, Shaak Ti showed her proficiency with Jar-Kai dual weapon fencing, wielding her own lightsaber as well as a captured Magna Guard electro staff. While capable of initially stonewalling a defense when necessary, T usually preferred to evade a foe's attacks rather than meet them head on. T would rapidly contort her body in order to evade attacks before they were even dished out. When her environment was too confined to invade, T would rely on counters, using Makashi shunts and parries to stall an opponent's assault, and then immediately launching into a lethal counter-offensive. Speaking of the environment, Shaak Ti would use the environment to advantage, guiding a fight to a location of her choice, and then capitalizing on the environment around her. In conclusion, Shaak Ti was a master-level duelist enforced by extreme situational awareness and exceptional tactical viability. There really is no contest in this area. While it is true that Plagueis is a master level combatant and a severe danger to anyone who is not on his level, the problem is that his level is below that of Shaak Ti. There are those who would say that the Sith Lord's ability to take himself out of his body and become the ultimate cerebral fighter would give him the edge, and in many cases I would be inclined to agree. However, in this case, Shaak Ti is a much greater challenge than Venemus, and when she found an opening in her opponent's guard, he would not be wounded, he would be dead. That being said, should Plagueis manage to hold out long enough to go into cerebral mode and lose all pretense and throw everything into lightsaber dueling, he would pose a serious threat to Shaak Ti, and I could see him winning an engagement on the back of that skill. However, the vast majority of times when a pure lightsaber duel is taking place, Shaak Ti will emerge victorious. Shaak Ti gets the edge for martial arts, training, and lightsaber combat. Next, we analyze their Force abilities. Quite literally a born and bred Sith Lord, Darth Plagueis was one of the most talented Sith his order had to offer, and boasted tremendous power in the Force. His innate skill was so great that he was able to develop and apply various forms of telepathy long before his formal training ever begun. As a Sith Lord, Plagueis would have a scientific mind, attacking the mysteries of the Force with an analytic mindset, believing that thorough investigation into all knowledge could be uncovered. His scientific studies did not detract from his overall goal, however, and he developed a set of practical abilities that would assist him in his mission for galactic dominance. His aptitude for physical augmentation was prodigious. Besides amping up speed and reflexes, Darth Plagueis could enhance his strike to the point where he could punch through an armored body and tear you limb from limb. He could also augment his screams to the point that it was a sonic weapon, along with various Sith techniques to regulate his bodily functions and purge toxins from his system. His telekinetic powers were astounding. His force pushes alone capable of atomizing his foes, and he could also lift and throw several tons. On a more technical level, Plagueis has used the force to choke and throw his lightsaber with ease. And for defense, he used telekinetic walls and shields to block all forms of incoming attacks. While neither his passive barriers nor his ability to penetrate others' barriers has ever been tested, considering his power level, both would be child's play for him. As one of the powers he developed as a child, telepathy was a skill that Plagueis had a particular aptitude for. He has made use of mind tricks to manipulate the weak-willed, conceal his force signature, and impressively producing force illusions convincing enough to fool Palpatine. Plagueis was an expert in the use of energy-based attacks, using force lightning to fix heavy machinery, start fires, and even covertly assassinate enemies. Though never shown, it has been implied that he is capable of flash frying targets and turning them to ash with his lightning. For a more active defense, Plagueis used Tutaminis, most notably absorbing a wave of blaster bolts from the crew of the Woebegone and redirecting it as in the form of force lightning. Finally, we come to perhaps the most infamous ability that Plagueis has in his arsenal, midichlorian manipulation. While he could kill someone by inducing mass die-offs within the midichlorians, and granted there is no known defense against this, there is one problem. It takes several minutes of concentration to begin, and therefore is useless within a combat scenario. Additionally, it should be noted that he did this only once and against a non-forceful opponent, so there is some debate that it wouldn't even work against a forceful opponent. So while he can will someone to die, it probably won't ever come of anything. Now, I'm sure that everyone wants me to mention the time that Plagueis raised Venemus from the dead. And while it is a true feat to his name, it should be noted that raising someone from the dead obviously has no combative uses, and as such will not play a factor. Obviously, if Plagueis could raise himself from the dead, he would have done so when he was killed by Palpatine. Lastly, we come to his bigness weakness as a Force user, and it is the same as in lightsaber dueling. Plagueis is once again extremely concerned with how a scene will look to a passerby after the battle, and as such will never use the full might of his combative abilities unless its life is threatened directly. Similar to earlier, while he could atomize your body, it would be much easier to explain if he just choked you out. This is a major weakness for Plagueis, as if he does not realize the trouble he is in before it is too late, he takes a major risk of getting killed before he can counter with his full power. In conclusion, Darth Plagueis is one of the most powerful Sith Lords in galactic history. However, his practical need to keep his usage of the Force from being noticed by prying eyes has led him to not use his power unless absolutely necessary. With decades of training and study under her belt, Shaak Ti was unquestionably one of the most powerful Jedi of her era. Her advanced philosophical understanding of the Jedi arts earning her a seat on the Jedi Council, her Togrutan nature granting her an instinctive closeness with her environment and strengthening her connection to the living Force. T's presence in the light side of the Force was so significant that she managed to influence the Force state of the entire planet of Felucia. Her influence was so significant, in fact, that after her death, the planet immediately fell to the dark side of the Force. Both Darth Vader and Galen Marek acknowledged her as a powerful Jedi Master, and stood as one of 3 council members to survive Order 66, alongside Obi-Wan and Yoda. Unlike the other prominent lightsiders of her era, Shaak Ti is noted for the magnitude of her abilities, rather than her range. She would compensate for her numerical lack of abilities to draw on by elevating the ones she did have to their highest possible application. Shaak Ti was prodigious with her force-based augmentation, and this was only amplified by her Togrutan nature. Most notably, her physical augmentation allowed her to carry on a marathon lightsaber duel while full sprinting for upwards of 30 minutes, and then go on to fight an army of Magna Guards, only showing signs of fatigue after using an excessive application of force speed, that allowed her to run fast enough that she would appear as a blur to an observer. Shaak Ti was more than an advanced telekinetic, and her applications of the power ranged from the blunt and the powerful to the subtle and inventive. Her baseline force blasts were powerful enough to scatter large contingents of battle droids and create crater-sized blasts in the stone walls, while during the first Battle of Kamino. Her, along with Attack of the Clones era Obi-Wan Kenobi and Anakin Skywalker, meaning she was the most powerful one present at the time, and therefore doing most of the heavy lifting, unleashed a force wave that ruptured an access tunnel to an underwater cloning facility, and then held back the crushing force of the ocean until the opening was sealed off. On a more technical level, Shaak Ti possessed a highly advanced level of aptitude with force throws, being able to throw a large amount of starship components in an attempt to subdue General Grievous. In addition, during her second duel with the General and his forces, she was observed using a saber throw along with telekinetically tying the General's cape around a maglev train to forcibly remove him from the battlefield. Shaak Ti has also shown proficiency at penetrating the telekinetic barriers of opponents. And while penetrating Galen Merrick's wall of air is nothing to be proud of, she has reliably penetrated other adepts' force walls on numerous occasions. Conversely, Shaak Ti's entry in the Power of the Jedi sourcebook credits her with an advanced force defenses, suggesting that your average force wielder would have trouble penetrating her passive shield, while to a below average force wielder like Zane Carrick or Scout, she would be practically untouchable. Shaak Ti's telepathic abilities were highly advanced. Besides the Jedi mind trick, which most Jedi were capable of, she was able to sustain a constant mental link with the native Felucians, as well as the Mega Sarlacc and the Ancient Abyss, all the while participating in her intense duel with Galen Merrick, compelling both to come to her aid and attack Merrick. Cycling back to the Power of the Jedi sourcebook, it also credits her with a proficiency in the healing arts, allowing her to heal herself while in the midst of combat. To round out her defense, Shaak Ti possesses Tutiminis. During her first duel with General Grievous, she managed to stop the energy of the lightsaber, but not its kinetic force, so she was thrown into a wall. Now, here is when some speculation on my part comes into play, as we know Shaak Ti was not operating at maximum capacity on Hypori, and what's more, she would have been even more exhausted by the end of the duel. Using these factors, I believe that Shaak Ti was capable of deflecting a lightsaber strike with Tutiminis in both kinetic and energy force. However, I do not believe that she can absorb the blade like Satele Shan, nor do I believe that she would use this power a lot, as it would be a tremendous drain on her force resources. Therefore, it is my personal theory that she would use Tutiminis only as a last resort when she cannot block or evade an incoming strike. Lastly, and unusually for a Jedi of her era, Shaak Ti is capable of offensive energy-based powers. Notably, during her duel with Galen Merrick, she seemed to use a power similar to Kinetite, in which she created explosive spheres of force energy that she then hurled at Merrick, and detonated in his vicinity. While there is some argument to whether T is capable of producing this power on worlds other than Felucia, it is my belief that she is capable of doing so, but simply had not fully developed this power until during or after Order 66. In conclusion, Shaak Ti is an excellent Force wielder, and while she may not be as powerful as the Yoda or Mace Windu of her era, she is a force to be reckoned with. This verdict is somewhere between the previous two in difficulty. While Shaak Ti does have many impressive feats to her name, and some unique and powerful applications of the Force, the fact of the matter is that everything she can do, Plagueis can do better, and on top of that, he has more firepower. While Shaak Ti can scatter groups of opponents, Plagueis can atomize them. While Ti can throw force balls at Plagueis, he could turn her to ash with lightning. Almost all of the rest of her abilities cancel out. But the last thing I need to talk about is Shaak Ti's ability to force heal. While this could normally give an advantage to her, the problem is that nothing Shaak Ti has will kill Plagueis before he ramps up his power and kills her. And force healing will do Shaak Ti little good if the strike that hits her is a one-shot, and I believe that Darth Plagueis has more than enough power in the Force to break through her Force shields and overwhelm her to menace. Because at the end of the day, you need a Tier 1 application of the Force to stop Plagueis, and while Shaak Ti is close, she ultimately comes up short. Darth Plagueis gets the edge and Force abilities. Lastly, let us look at their weapons and equipment. Shaak Ti uses the standard lightsaber with a blue Ilum crystal that provides no extra benefits other than familiarity with her own handiwork. Darth Plagueis wields a lightsaber with a red synthetic crystal as the focusing lens. The hilt is enlarged to accommodate his larger hands and longer fingers due to his humanoid physiology. Darth Sidious mentioned that it was somewhat unwieldy for him to wield one-handed in his human hands and had to wield two-handed. However, because Darth Plagueis' lightsaber is larger simply for scale purposes, there are no extra benefits, save familiarity with his own handiwork. Additionally, while there are images of Darth Plagueis wielding two lightsabers, he does not regularly carry two, and therefore will not have an extra weapon with him, due to the fact that both combatants wield fairly standard lightsabers with no special benefits. No edge will be given for weapons and equipment. And now, the verdict. For this fight, let's say it takes place in Count Dooku's secret hangar on Geonosis, with multiple loose objects of various sizes for the combatants to use. Additionally, let us assume that for the purpose of this fight, neither combatant recognizes the other, because two combatants recognizing each other would cause the combatants to behave much more differently than normal, and as such would not be an even playing field. Additionally, and as per usual, and to keep the playing field even, neither combatant will have time to prepare for the battle, and the fight will start with both combatants in full view of each other. As a final tally for this matchup, I see the victor winning 8 times out of 10. This will be a scenario of 1 majority victory. Let us begin. Shaak Ti found herself in a large chamber. What she was doing here, she did not know. And as she began to look around, she felt cold. Freezing cold. Then she saw him, an over 2-meter tall shadowy figure with a red lightsaber blazing. Saw through the Force, he was a being of pure power and darkness. Quickly drawing her own blade, she waited for her opponent's first move. Darth Plagueis stared at his opponent from across the chamber. A female Togruta, it appeared. He knew not what he was doing there, and resolved to initiate an investigation immediately after he dealt with the Jedi. Speaking of the Jedi, she was just as confused as him by their predicament, if her Force signature was any indication. Her signature also told him that she was a powerful council master at least, if not a senior one. Plagueis watched her ignite her lightsaber and adopt an Ataru ready stance, which was typical for most Jedi. Plagueis adopted his own stance and leapt towards his opponent, aiming for the kill. In the early fight, I see Shaak Ti having all the cards, with her greater skill in lightsaber combat pushing Plagueis onto his back foot and forcing him to fight almost purely defensively. However, the Sith Lord's power and skill in the Force should allow him to survive, and more often than not, I see only 2 scenarios in which this fight ends so early. And, more often than not, I foresee that this fight will be moving to the mid and late fights. Shaak Ti watched as her opponent flew towards her, striking at her head with a jab that she easily dodged and countered with a series of attacks. Soon, Ti was having little trouble with her opponent, throwing everything into a saber offense that was slowly pushing her opponent back. More than once, a cut would char some robe. A thrust would poke a hole in a sleeve. But try as she might, she could not seem to injure her Sith opponent, let alone kill him. Resolving to strike the Sith down, she doubled her attack and launched into another offensive flourish. Darth Plagueis was worried. This Jedi Master was clearly a master of the blade, and was bringing the fight to him more than even Venemus had. Plagueis began to recognize the seriousness of the situation he was in, when his hood was set aflame by a near miss from the Jedi's weapon. Throwing off his cloak, He leapt backward to regain some room and took himself out of his body, fighting from behind himself as only he blocked the Jedi strikes, and did not even attempt to retaliate. Plagueis kept up his defense for several minutes until he realized that not one of his skills with the lightsaber was going to get him out of this predicament. Thinking quickly, he released a force push that caught the Jedi in her gunt and sent her flying across the chamber. In midair, the Jedi turned her flight into a controlled spin, and upon touching the ground gracefully, somersaulted to her feet in a Makashi salute, as they began advancing at each other once more. The mid-fight is where I believe that the fight will end around the same amount of times as the early fight, as Plagueis would not be fully ready to unleash his fury, and Shaak Ti would still be figuring out a way to get around the Sith Lord's guard. I do believe, though, that unlike the early fight, that force powers would come much more into play, with Shaak Ti especially taking much more assertive action as she is simply more naturally inclined to. Shaak Ti advanced slowly towards her opponent, who she now knew could only be a true Sith Lord. She noted that he was a male Mune, and by the looks of his respirator, was severely handicapped when it came to his ability to breathe. Realizing that his mask was her solution to victory, she pulled up the map of her area in her mind that her montrals provided, and spotted a few power conduits, engine components, and a Hydra spanner. Without hesitation, she threw them at the Mune, with the heavier objects aimed for where he currently was, with the lighter and more deadly objects being thrown in the areas where he might dodge to. The Sith Lord did as expected, using his lightsaber to cleave through the object aimed at him and jump through the gap left by their forcible separation. However, Shaak Ti was not expecting the hammer fist of a force attack that sent her smashing into the wall behind her, cracking the structure. Shaak Ti quickly began a limited self-healing process, and felt cracked bones along with cuts and still forming bruises beginning to mend themselves. T then realized she needed to buy herself some time, and would launch into a force offensive of her own, throwing waves of force energy at her along with dodging retaliatory strikes, while speeding up her healing as fast as she could, only to find herself riding a bolt of force lightning across the chamber. T managed to stop herself before hitting the pillar again, and came to a rest on the floor twitching. Shaak Ti struggled to her feet, looking at the Sith Lord in front of her, noticing his unbridled rage. A rage that seemed to consume everything around it, and all of that rage was directed right towards her. Raising her lightsaber, Ti braced herself for his next assault. This late fight is where I see the fight ending 6 times out of 10. And all the scenarios of the late fight end up much the same way, with the same victor. The late fight would be primarily a force duel in my eyes, with Darth Plagueis realizing that he could not defeat Shaak Ti in lightsaber combat, and Shaak Ti having been stopped from taking out Plagueis, and she would resort to force-based attacks. That is not to say that lightsabers wouldn't come into play, and if either combatant is inattentive with their saber guard for even a moment, they would be killed by their adversary. Darth Plagueis was the dark side of the Force. He was anger. He was hatred. He felt his emotions coursing through his veins as he began releasing powerful Force waves, repulses, and lightning. He sent the Jedi running for cover as he blasted away stone pillars, charged through the room with Force lightning. Plagueis was letting loose, with everything he had, with one singular focus in mind: kill the Jedi. Shaak Ti leaped from pillar to pillar, boulder to boulder, wall to wall, as she waited for the Sith Lord's force onslaught to stall. Seeing a momentary gap between lightning bursts, she locked her saber in the on position and threw it at her adversary. She telekinetically moved its spinning arc as she dodged through the air until it struck home, sending her opponent's blade, as well as her own, careening away from the two combatants. Seizing on her opportunity, Shaak Ti closed the distance and began a flurry of kicks and punches, aimed at tearing her opponent's guard down, and an opportunity for her to disable the Sith Lord's respirator. Shaak Ti never got the chance, as after only a singular punch connected with the Mune, she was already being hurled back across the chamber from yet another force repulse. Shaak Ti now knew in her heart of hearts that she could not win this fight, and so decided on a plan, then made her move. Darth Plagueis was reveling in the fight until the Jedi suddenly and calmly walked out in front of him. He began to raise his hand for another blast of energy when he stopped cold. He heard a fluttering in the wind, and too late did he turn around in time to see his discarded cloak still set aflame from his lightsaber strike wrap around his head. Plagueis started to leap away when he found himself caught in the after effect of a force wave that sent him flying across the battleground into a wall. Dangerous scents still tingle as he ripped off the garment, exposing a now burned cranium to see multiple orbs of light flying towards him at high speed. Shaak Ti did not wait to see the end result of the attack, simply calling both her and her opponent's sabers to her hands and sprinting out of the chamber, calling on the last of her energy reserves as she ran faster across the wastes, until an observer would have only seen a blur of brown and red as she raced away from the chamber and off into the Geonosian desert. Darth Plagueis threw up a force shield at the last moment that shielded him from the attack, as he was once again thrown across the chamber from the explosion. He leapt to his feet, and after a quick visual survey, and with rage building up inside him, he let loose a force scream that destroyed everything in the chamber. The empty chamber. To better explain my decision on the victor, I would like to use a passage from the novel Yoda Dark Rendezvous, which reads as follows. Physically, Scout gave herself a very slight advantage in speed and strength, thanks to her extra training. Technically, they were comparable. Hana, possibly stronger with the lightsaber, while Scout was definitely ahead in unarmed techniques that was taught by Master Ironhand. But when the Force was added into the equation, the contest wasn't even close. This passage to me is exactly how a fight between Shaak Ti and Darth Plagueis would be mapped out. The only ways I see Shaak Ti winning about is a crazy all-out saber assault on Plagueis that immediately manages to kill him before he realizes how much trouble he is in. A possible physical bout in which Shaak Ti disables the Sith Lord's respirator, or a circumstantial victory much in the way that Scout defeated Hana, is possible, however unlikely in my opinion. I see no other ways that Shaak Ti could emerge victorious, and while I do hold the firm belief that she could escape if she wanted to, if Shaak Ti stows to stay and fight against Plagueis, she would be cut down. And thus, I declare Darth Plagueis the winner. Thank you all for watching this episode of the first season of the Versus series. Many of you will have noticed from now on, fleeing a battlefield will be an option for the final verdicts, for those characters that are willing and able to do so, though I promise this will not always happen. Also, keep in mind that this is all my opinion, and feel free to leave comments, criticism, or suggestions from future matchups down below. I will see you all next time. This is the Phoenix Exalt, signing out, and may the Force be with you, always.